Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Namaduhu wa nasalli ala Rasulih al-Kareem. Viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Some verses of the Quran are self-explanatory, do not require much explanation, while some of the verses of the Quran require a detailed explanation and a very deep knowledge. The verses that follow are self-explanatory, and I'll just read the translation starting with verse 211. The translation says, "Ask the children of Israel how many a clear sign we gave them, and whoever changes the blessings of Allah after it has come to him, Allah then is severe in retribution." So the children of Israel, or the Bani Israel, they were the believers of the time. The prophets had come to them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided them through his books. But we know from history that changes were made in the books by the people of the time, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishment came. Verse 12, 212, "Beautified is the life of the world for those who disbelieve, and they mock the believers, but those who fear Allah will be above them on the day of resurrection, and Allah gives to whom He wills beyond measure." This is a reminder, once again, that this world is a deception. It seems that this is going to last forever, but this world is very temporary. But the disbelievers are distracted by the beauty of this world, and they make fun of the believers, and they think they are rightly guided, while they think that believers are misguided. This verse is for warning the disbelievers that don't be deceived by the beauty of this world. Whatever beauty there is in this world is very short, it's very temporary. As we know, a human being goes through so many stages. As a child, then becomes young, then he becomes old, and then one day he just leaves this world. So the whole process from childbirth to death seems like long, but it's really very short. And all the beauty and all the wealth and all the great good things of life, they vanish once the person enters the grave, and all the enjoyment that he had in this life is of no use to him. This is just a reminder to all mankind that the real life is coming, and preparation has to be made for that. In verse 213, the translation is, "Mankind were one ummah, one community. Then Allah sent the prophets bearing good tidings and warnings, and with them He sent the book with the truth, that it might judge between mankind about that wherein they differed. And only those to whom the book was given differed concerning it, after clear proofs had come to them through hatred of one another. Then Allah by His will guided those who believed to the truth of that wherein they had differed, and Allah guides whom He wills to the straight path." And this again tells us about the history of mankind. The truth came from Allah, and that truth was rejected by some people out of arrogance or hatred, and the result was they went in the wrong direction. This is the theme of the Quran. The guidance has been coming to people, but some people rejected it and some people accepted it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides those whom Allah thinks are to be guided, who are making effort. And actually the next verse of the Quran talks about that, the effort that's made by the believers. 214, the translation goes on to say, "Do you think that you will enter paradise while there have not come yet to you such trials as came to those who passed away before you? Deprivation and suffering afflicted them, and so oppressed were they that the messenger and those who believed cried, 'When comes the help of Allah?' behold, the help of Allah is near. This verse tells us that Allah will test, will try, as He tried people in the past. And paradise is not free, it's not given without the tests. This is the system that Allah has created. Paradise, one has to work for it. As I've said in the previous video, people have to earn. There is a merit system. Allah is not whimsical that He will give paradise to some and hell to others, regardless of the merit. So this verse is very important for people who think that paradise is just something that you ask for without being tried and tested. This is a law that Allah has established. And the people of belief were afflicted with suffering and oppressed. And the messengers who believed, even they were so desperate that they asked when the help of Allah is coming. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that the help of Allah is near. But having said that, one has to keep in mind that the tests and the trials Allah has decided, decreed, they will come, as it came to the prophets and it came to His companions. But they passed the test, they were patient in suffering, and they were grateful when the help came. This is an important lesson for all people, for all times to come, that this is a system of Allah, that He tests people, tests their iman. And only those people who pass the test will go to paradise. And those who fail the test will not go to paradise. In 215, the translation is, they ask you what should they spend. What they should spend, say, whatever you spend for good must be for parents and relatives, orphans and the needy and the wayfarer, and whatever good you may do, Allah is aware of that. So spending is one of the virtues, is one of the good deeds for others, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not for any other reason. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give reward for all the good deeds that were done by the person in this life for the sake of pleasing Allah. 216, fighting is enjoined upon you, though you are averse to it, and it may be that you dislike a thing which is good for you. It may be that you may dislike a thing which is good for you, and you may love something which is bad for you, and Allah knows and you do not know. So fighting against injustice, fighting against oppression, fighting against mischief in the world is required for justice, because Allah is the most just and He loves people who do justice. So sometimes people run away from that because it requires struggle, like the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to fight to defend themselves when they were attacked by the disbelievers in Medina who were out to destroy them, to destroy the truth. They had to fight back and protect themselves, defend themselves. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed that. In the case of the companions, the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were making effort to spread the truth, but the disbelievers were trying to wipe them out. So this verse was revealed that they are allowed to defend themselves and to protect their faith, to protect their iman. But it has to be said, it has to be read in the context of defense, not oppression. It's not to oppress people, but to defend the truth. In verse 217, the translation goes on to say, they ask you concerning fighting in the sacred month. Say fighting in it is something grave, but it is far more grave in the sight of Allah to hinder men from the path of Allah and to disbelieve in Him and bar His worshippers from the sacred mosque and to expel its people from there, and persecution is worse than killing, nor will they cease to fight with you till they turn you away from faith. If you are able, and whoever of you turns from his faith and dies disbeliever, such are they whose deeds will go waste in this world, and in the hereafter, those are the inhabitants of the fire, there they shall abide forever. This verse makes it clear that the real life, the life of the akhirah, this is to show that how much importance Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to the akhirah. This life is very short and the real life is coming, and one has to struggle for that. And sometimes it may be that a person may like something, but it's not good for that person. And a person may hate something which is good for that person. So fighting for the truth and fighting for justice is very important because it affects the person's afterlife. It affects the person's eternity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps reminding. This is another verse that tells us how much importance is to be given to establishing justice. As in the case of the companions, the Sahaba, they established justice in the land. And when people were opposing them, they had to fight with them to establish justice. Justice is, the scholars say, if there was another word for Islam, it would be justice. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just, and He loves people who are just. And this is required for the believers, that they should establish justice so that everybody can benefit. Because people who are living in an unjust system, their faith, their iman will be affected. And they will turn away from the truth. And we see from history, from experience, and many times people turn away from truth because they're afraid of what the consequences might be. They run away from the truth because the system is unjust, it is oppressive, and they lose their faith and they lose their akhirah. So establishing justice is a very important part of Islam. And this verse is very clear about that the real life is the life of akhirah. And one has to strive for that, and strive for that in this world. Verse 218, those who believe and those who emigrate and strive in the way of Allah, they have hope of the mercy of Allah, and Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. Like the Sahaba, the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they had to emigrate, they had to leave their homes because they were being oppressed in Mecca. The Meccans, the unbelievers, were causing great hardship for them, to a point that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to leave and had to go to Medina to migrate. So these people were migrating for the sake of truth, and they were fighting to establish the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the earth. But they were pursued by the unbelievers, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help came when they were attacked. In verse 219, it goes on to say, they ask you concerning wine and gambling. Say, in both is great sin and benefits for men, but the sin in them is greater than their benefit. And they ask you what they should spend. Say, the surplus for your needs. Thus Allah may explain to you His revelations so that you may reflect. This verse is very important for people who ask questions about wine and gambling and things like that. The one who knows, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who knows the present, the past, the future, who knows what's good for mankind, what's bad for mankind, because the mankind is the creation of Allah. These people do not realize that when the Creator is saying that the sin in gambling and wine is greater than the benefit, they need to pay attention to that. It said when these verses were revealed, the people who were involved in this, they just stopped. They stopped this because they understood that there is more harm in these things than there is benefit. There may be some benefit, but the harm is greater. And who is telling is the one who knows everything. Or people wait for scientists to tell them whether it's good or bad. The societies where this is common, we know from experience how much harm is done how many millions of people suffer. And Allah does not want people to suffer. But people bring the suffering upon them own selves because they're doing what they desire. They're not doing what Allah has commanded. When they're doing something, what is their desire, they cause harm to themselves. As was said in the previous verse, sometimes people may love something which is bad for them and hate something which is good for them. So the one who knows everything is saying that there is harm, this is a great sin. And of course the sin, of course, is such that it brings upon them problems in this life. And the big problems will come in the next life. Sometimes people say, well, so-and-so is doing this, but he's not having any problems. But we don't know what's going to happen later on. He doesn't know that. And when the problems come, then they just sit back and have regrets, but that's not going to help. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving these rules for the benefit of mankind. Allah doesn't benefit if they drink, if they don't drink wine or they don't gamble. It makes no difference to Allah one way or the other. His kingdom is still there. His power is still there. But the people who are engaged or doing these things will bring harm upon themselves, and it is a common experience of mankind that this is actually what happens. It takes time, but it happens. Verse 220 goes on to say, upon the world and the hereafter, and they ask you concerning the orphans, say to work for their good is the best course. If you live jointly with them, they are your brothers. Allah knows the one who means mischief as against the one who works for good. And had Allah so willed, He could have put you in difficulties. Surely Allah is almighty and wise. This is about the virtue, the good deeds one does with regards to orphans, people who need help. Allah likes people who help others for the sake of Allah. So Allah has put mercy in the hearts of people. They take care of others, and they will be rewarded by Allah on the Day of Judgment. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes people to do things that will benefit humanity. But having said all that, these are just the different good deeds that have been mentioned in the Quran. It's not one is to do one and not the others. All these things have to be in one package. If not, a person is helping the orphans, that doesn't mean he should be doing other wrong things. Helping the orphans is good. But having said that, it doesn't give him the liberty, so to speak, to do things that displease Allah. So one has to look at the whole package. If a person is doing some good deeds and some bad deeds, then on the Day of Judgment, the good and the bad will be weighed on the scale. And if the good deeds outweigh the bad deeds, then the person will be successful. And if the bad deeds outweigh the good deeds, the person will be unsuccessful. And verse 221 goes on to give more instructions about the person's married life and how important it is to be married to the right person. And do not marry women. The translation goes on to say, and do not marry women who are polytheists until they believe. And a believing slave girl is better than a polytheistic woman, even though she may please you, and do not give your women in marriage to men who are polytheists until they believe. And a believing slave is better than a polytheist, even though they may please you. These invite you to the fire, and Allah invites you to the garden and forgiveness by His leave, and makes clear His revelations to mankind, that they may be mindful. Once again, this is a reminder to all mankind that belief is very important. A person may be very pleasing, a person may have many qualities, but if the person is a disbeliever, that person will take a person to the hellfire. And this is a verse that makes it clear that marriage is a very important part of Islam. A marriage is is either going to take a person towards the good, or it will take a person to the wrong place. A marriage is a very important part in a person's life, and a person's choice will determine how his life is going to be led. This is the guidance from Allah as to how people should make decisions. Belief is, of course, the first important step, the precondition when it comes to the question of marriage. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the understanding of the Quran, and also to give us the ability to practice what the Quran is telling us to do. Wa akhir dawana in alhamdulillah rabbil alameen.